we're here. Time for the top 25 albums of 2022. Now, unfortunately, I was very, very tempted to do a top 50 albums this year, but I was tired, okay? And having to think about all the music that I listened to this year could easily go into 75 or 100. I just felt like it was less stressful to keep it condensed at the very best of everything that I feel like I listened to this year. So if there's a pick in here that you love that isn't included, once again, suck my, I could care less. But I will tell you there were plenty of picks here that got swapped out, positions changed, albums that I wanted to include but couldn't to maintain the efficiency of the 25. I'm just here to say I feel like trash. Number 25 is Smino's Love for Rent. You know I love Smino. You know this was not a long time coming. I've been waiting for Smino to drop another project since 2018. I feel like it's been long enough. He came through. Plenty of personality, plenty of wit. I feel like he takes himself to task here with much stronger hooks. That same almost drunken style of rap that I love from him so much, this crevice style of rap. Inviting what I feel to be more appropriate collaborators on this project too. Number 24, I got Westside Boogie's More Black Superheroes. I actually love this record from Boogie. It's just clear that he's not taking himself too seriously while acknowledging his past, his issues, his own problems, but not treating himself like a prima donna. He's never the most important figure in the room, even though the record is solely about him. It's not melodramatic, it's honest, it's thoughtful, but most importantly, it's realistic, while also being melodic and pretty rhythmic. I think this is his best project to date. Here's a pick that almost didn't make the list. That is Heroes and Villains from Metro Boomin. At first, this was just gonna be an honorable mention. And at first, I didn't like it as much as I thought I would. But the more and more I'm reminded of Prime Future, even Prime Thug on some of these tracks, mixed in with some really good tracks from Don Toliver, some great verses from 21 Savage, despite how much I would prefer him not being on the album as much. And though I would like for this album to be a bit more resourceful in other names that it could tap to make records that I feel are a bit less predictable, I still think that the records that are created with Metro Boomin and company get them to tap into what they do best. Also, I love the use of the piano on this album. It gets me every time. At number 22, I got Amber Mark's 3 Dimensions Deep. This album feels like a really polished pearl. Ridiculously, blindingly shiny at some points. Some moments over processed, some moments doing too much. But overall, it's a great experience, and I think it's a joy to listen to. Amber Mark's a beautiful singer. When she hits the spot just right, the track is always fantastic to listen to. At number 21, I've got The Weeknd's Dawn FM project. This album seems to lead The Weeknd to decisions he's made over the last 10 years, and whether or not he's physically and mentally equipped to deal with the consequences of such. But the more and more you listen to this record, you realize that he's saying he knows that there are consequences. He just don't give a fuck. But at the very least, he seems much more focused, aware, and mature of the decisions that he's making on this album and the ultimate destination that it could lead him to, which makes his convictions, his morality, and the things that he wants overall come off much stronger here on this album than they did in the past. On top of that, his melodies are fantastic, and I think his singing is top notch. Number 20, I got Tana Talk 4 from Benny the Butcher. I think this is Benny's most focused record to date. I think this album has the strongest rapping I've ever heard from him. Keeping Tana Talk 3 in mind, I think this is easily Benny's most enjoyable record from a lyrical perspective, but also from a song perspective. Not nearly as flashy and as polished as the record that he made with Hit Boy, but keeping just enough dirt and grime from his classic Griselda records without losing some of that, I don't really want to call it authenticity, but without losing some of that grit that he gained from the underground. I think there's a good, healthy combination of it here on Tana Talk 4.
Nigga that's not in the top 10 and all that weird rapper shit, and they not near half as this. Be in my ear capping while I'm focused on the tier after this.
At number 19, I got Conway the Machine with God Don't Make Mistakes. Also, some of Conway's best writing, some of his best songs, some of his most introspective bars and introspective songs in general show up on this album. Conway at his most thoughtful, while not losing much of that wit that made him such a likable personality in Griselda in the first place. He still maintains that air of being what I feel to be the genuine next Biggie when it comes to the personality that he has and maintains on his records, but diversifies himself. Like, that is the Conway that I like to listen to. Number 18 is going to be Eviscerated from Funeral. This really just feels like ear candy to me. It's such a fun rush of hyperpop rap music. Funeral is incredibly consistent and these beats are ridiculously catchy. It accomplishes this mission of just giving you energy by feeling like you've been injected by an IV. Number 17 is going to be Louis from Kenny Beats. This album feels like a beat party from the perspective of Kenny Beats' studio. I feel like I'm a ghost orbiting his computer as he's putting together these artistless beats, but they still managed to develop a personality as the songs progress, due to the creative sampling on this project as well. Yo, Hot Hand almost landed in my top 50 just because of how much it reminds me of a less melancholic Kneel by Mine from Richard Young and Raul Rafri. Music like this that builds into something like so cinematic gives me a lot of hope for whoever Kenny Beats decides to work with in the future and the skills that he'll be able to bring out of them. At number 16, I've got Denzel Curry's Melt My Eyes, See Your Future album. I actually love this record, and I love the growth personally from Denzel Curry that's displayed on this album, and I also love how vulnerable and honest it is. It really feels like Denzel Curry dug deep into his bag, really looked at his life, looked at everything that he said and done up until this point, and decided to reflect and even change a lot of things, addressing trauma, addressing insecurity and immaturity. Just a lot of personal growth on this album, and you can see it reflected not only in the music because of how classy a lot of it is, and I do love that live session that he did for this album as well, but lyrically you can tell that he's just more focused, more centered. At number 15, I've got Sedan Archives with Natural Brown from Queen. I love that I found out who Sedan Archives was when I did back in 2018, because it makes records like this that are kind of big contrasts and comparisons such a joy to listen to. I wouldn't call her artsy, but Sedan Archives definitely used to make music that was almost art-like to a point where she wanted it to be looked at as these like perfect statues. There's such a stark difference in blatant imperfection with these new records. She blends so many different styles and dives into so many different dimensions on this record. Her melodies are infectious, her harmonies are sharp, the musical palette is extremely diverse, open-minded, and resourceful. The instrumentation is creative and forward-thinking, and I just think she wants more, so she's doing more. Number 14 is going to be Ari Lennox with Age, Sex, Location. I can't really describe this album. It is drenched in sensuality and sexuality, finesse. It's dim light with the candles on and the bath water is already run. It's Ari Lennox's best album to date. At number 13, I'm gonna put Steve Lacy's Gemini Rights. As opposed to what seemed like ramblings on Steve Lacy's last album, excuse me, I got a belch and I'm trying to hold it in so I don't be rude. This album appears much more focused and delivers Steve Lacy's most powerful, strongest vibe, if that's what you'll use to describe this album yet. He's so much more confident, so much more expressive. I think he's using a lot more tools at his disposal and even diversifying his own singing on this record, not to appeal to more demographics, but to really display that massive, huge personality that I've been feeling like he's been hiding in a lot of his music since I first discovered him. Number 12, I'm gonna give it to BabyFace Ray with Mob. I fell in love with Face earlier this year, especially that track with Icewear Vezo 6 Mile Show. That was gonna be in my top 50 for songs, but then Mob dropped at the end of the year, and I was like, there's no way that he's going to be able to compete with Face. There's no way he's going to be able to do that. But here comes Mob with tracks that definitely display Babyface's really chill, laid-back personality, but with beats that are far more hard-hitting. These beats don't always get Babyface Ray to change how he expresses himself, but they do end up getting him to change the intensity at which he raps. Puts him in a position to be a much better storyteller, to make better relationship cuts, to be more focused, to be more driven. This is actually one of the few albums I'd be excited for a deluxe from.
I had to visit my jeweler, he told me I'm cooler than all of this ice in here. Man, my whole life in a movie, I traveled the world, I made sure the price was fair.
This nigga is just too cool. He too cool with it, bro. He too cool with it. At number 11, I got Lucky. Flawless Like Me. You know I love Lucky, and I think he did it again with this new drop. I think many of these hooks are infectious. I think these beats are earworms. The scenery of this world that Lucky is painting is so saturated, it's so colorful. There's a hint of going with the motions, and one could argue that Lucky's rapping before was a lot more intense, which I would agree with, but I just cannot get over how it all blends together so well to make a record that I think is one of Chicago's most psychedelic hip-hop artists to date. Number 10 is Beach House with One Twice Melody. I love this record, and I don't have any other words to describe it with other than it's not something that I ever consciously approach. It's just an album that I turn on, and I just allow it to consume me. Y'all know I'm a synth whore, so there's plenty of that for me. But the way I describe myself when listening to this record is imagine I'm a cow and Beach House is the UFO and I just got to get sucked up. That's really it. At number 9, I got Asake, Mr. Money with the Vibe. And again, I can only use 2 words to describe this album. Choir, Afro beats. At number 8, I got Rome Streetz' Kiss the Ring. I think this is a great new Griselda showcase. I've been listening to Rome Streetz for a while. I think he's an incredibly consistent artist, and I think he also made some of the best songs in his entire career on this album. If you've been a Rome Streetz fan for a long time, I don't see why you wouldn't consider this one of his best, if not his very best. Number 7, I got Bang Gang Lonnie Benz with Scorpion Eyes. Lonnie has what might be my favorite takeaway of dealing with your trauma that I've heard this year. The way he tackles his traumas and the way he deals with his anxieties, I feel like I'm his reflection. I feel like I'm the person that he's rapping at when he looks in the mirror. That's how deep this project feels a lot of the time. But he talks about these issues and these pains as if they're passing thoughts. It's some heavy shit in this album that gets brought up in one line and easily thrown to the side, ignored, and something else just as traumatic brought up in the next. It is a bleak, heavy knocking album that is filled with many of the harsh realities of the inner city. His voice oftentimes sounds like it's shuddering or it's shivering around much of the cold and harsh content that he's rapping about. I'd liken it to Tremors given the subject matter here. I've just never heard someone say, I have something wrong with me and I don't know how to fix it more than on this album. This shit is like hard. Like, it's a dope album, but it's also sad as fuck. There are moments where his voice has such fragility and is begging for aid or guidance. He even addresses this on Help Me. It's tragic, but it's also beautiful to me. At number 6, I got JID. Jid with The Forever Story. The best phrase that I could use to describe JID's album this year is It Takes a Village. And JID on this album is taking us through a tour of his, house by house, introducing relatives and family friends through stories of betrayal, trauma, loyalty, and inspiration. I also think it's important to note how much emphasis JID places on that community that he's built, how necessary and integral this village is in reference to entering the game as a black artist. With so many different vultures looking to exploit you, it can become easy for an artist without this love of a village that JID has, values, and talks about so much throughout this album, to fall prey to predatory corporations.
This my brother, my hitter, my slugger, my nigga, my jigger, my killer, my dog.
At number 5, I got Mabe Fratti with Desde, Aquí. Dude, I fucked that up. I know I did somehow. The thing that originally drew me to her music, I think back in 2019 or 2020, was how lush and light most of it felt. It was like taking a very deep breath and letting out the biggest exhale. But here on this album is so much more tart and like bitter in comparison, preventing her voice from relying or being blended into that nature-like aesthetic on her previous record. Having none of that green and lush atmosphere leaves her voice on this album a lot more prevalent than before. If on previous records she came across as like Eve, a caretaker to what I would describe as the musical equivalent of the Garden of Eden, here it sounds like she herself is the creator with no foundation, basically building a world from scratch, and I like the way it comes off for this album. 4, I've got Why Is Blood with And in the Darkness, Hearts Aglow. This album is such a self-reflective piece of art to me, what feels like a bit of a decomposition of the world's design from Natalie's perspective. In a lot of ways, this album feels like I'm lost in a bit of a fog, and Natalie's voice is like the guiding light that's like illuminating different paths for me to follow. Production-wise, it's got this very 70s-like foundation, and how it consistently feels like kaleidoscopic and warm and hypnotic. A lot of these tracks just feel like I'm witnessing birth, like the start of life in every form. At number 3, I've got FKA Twigs with Caprisongs. I just love to see that departure from trauma and pain that she so clearly illustrated on her previous record, Mary Magdalene. This project in comparison feels much like a victory lap, not only in acknowledging where she progressed from, but living, embracing, enjoying the moments that she's built with these songs in front of her. I just think it's a much more fun and enjoyable take on Twigs. Where'd you fucking go? I didn't realize how much I came around to Tears in the Club too. Like, that's actually a great track. At number 2, I got Super Tecmo Bow from Boldy James. You already know what it is. This is probably my second most favorite album from Boldy James. Behind Mom, chemistry that Al and Boldy have is comparable to the moon and the sun, bro. It's just like one MVP giving the light or the ball to the next MVP. Boldy constantly being allied these beautiful samples, these hazy beats. This sonic portraiture almost makes it easy for Boldy to be the star player. His dead style delivery makes these tracks easy to follow from like a narrative perspective. And the way the album progresses makes a lot of these tracks feel like fragmented tales or even lost puzzle pieces to a much broader, unfinished image from a life that Boldy might be distancing himself from. And I know you're gonna say, this album technically came out in 2021. Bitch, it was released after December. I don't care what you have to say.
Before I had a Rollo, it was Technos and Jacobs. Pop B came from the bill off the Hell Block. Brought the 6 out.
It's like the more that I teach you, the more dumber I get. Like a Hershey kiss. Don't be scared to be last to shoot, just don't be first to miss.
Oh my God. And at number 1, I thought long and hard about this. I did. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't have this number 1 spot selected until like 2 months ago. I knew 2 months ago that it was gonna be my 1, but I really didn't think it was gonna stay my 1. It's Black Country New Road with Ants From Up There once again, taking my top spots, dominating my shit for the whole year. This is the second LP from this rock group I was introduced to just 10 months ago. Thankfully, a chatter came in to tell me about this record while I was listening to a King Gizzard record on stream way earlier this year. And after hearing it all the way through, I'm so thankful that I didn't encounter this record or it wasn't created until this year, because had I heard this in 2020, I might not be here right now. This would not have been a good combination. This album feels like the end credits. And it never feels like it's starting, if that makes any sense. It always feels like it's ending. It's always closing the curtains, like on every track. Damn near every song has what I describe as this musical wave goodbye, but never an authoritative finale telling you to leave. It's inviting, but I also feel like I'm being pushed away by a hand that also never lets me go. The instrumentation on these records carries such a strong yet soft harmony. Good Will Hunting is the personification of, like, I don't want to call it self-deprecation, but leaving your ego at the door. Completely deleting your self-worth and giving in to humility. It is like desperation in a track.
Don't ring it, please don't go. Oh, I'd wait there, float with the wreckage, fashion a long sword, traverse the milk.
I keep going over like different like analogies and different thoughts about the place where he inserted the blade. And like right now in this very moment, the only thing that I could use to describe it is like what it feels like to be in the presence of a deer, but like in a relationship, walking up to a deer, approaching a deer. Any subtle moves, any slight shifts in your momentum in any direction will immediately scare it away. Fleeing into the woods, never to be seen again. That's how fragile the person he's in a relationship with in reference to this traumatic event is that he's describing, but also how like unintentionally dependent he is on her at the same time. All of these things happen, but just like in the most theatrical way possible. This album is a personal and relationship version of Ragnarok. It's about dependence and growth, perception and self-worth, trauma and hope, abandonment, separation anxiety, rejection, delusions, depression. So many emotions and perspectives are released from so few people on this album, which really paint this very emotionally painful picture for Isaac as he's talking about the way he's coming off to this person that he's interested in. All of it happening over these arrangements that sound like they're building up into this huge climactic cry, like this big weeping session. It's an incredible album, but a very heavy and loaded listen. And I encourage you to prepare yourself if you plan on listening to this, if you've recently been in a breakup. Don't do it to yourself, but do it because I want to see what happens to you. That is how I feel about my number 1 spot. Yeah. Let me know what your favorite album this year has been. These are mine, my top 25. Could I have made 50? Of course. Did I want to take myself through the stress of doing that at the last minute? Absolutely not. Fuck you. I love these records equally, even though they're numbered. I love them in different ways. And if you don't see one of your picks here, once again, fuck you. This is about me and my list. You can make your own. But I will say there are a few records that I wanted to include in this list that I didn't get a chance to throw in here because they just didn't make my top 25. And those are the Danger Mouse and Black Thought record, the Lupe Fiasco record, the Billy Woods record. I didn't forget about these, but they just didn't make it, my boy. They didn't make it. Once again, y'all let me know what records you've been listening to. Put me on. Put me on. I'm looking to listen to anything that's great. Hope you got some good selections out of this list here. And until next time, lists are done, but I still got more coming for you. I'll see you soon. And I'm out.